I'm Chris, and I work at the Office of Public Instruction, and I am the science coordinator. And I co-teach this class with Heather, who I'll ask to introduce herself in just a minute. The course stays with this tie to OPI, but most of the time it'll be Heather that you get information from or that you see interacting with you. She's the one who actually is the facilitator, and I work with her to keep the course to have that connection to OPI so that you guys know that what you're doing is what we're kind of trying to get out to teachers. And you have both of our contact information. So that's just quickly, and for those of you who don't know how I ended up at OPI, I was a high school science teacher. And then I went back to get a master's kind of graduate degree. And my area of research is actually learning and how we learn. And you'll definitely see a lot of that in the design of this course. It was designed as a collaboration between myself and one of my colleagues from when I was in graduate school. And right now I'm working on re-recording some of the videos that have her voice on them so that you don't have a stranger talking to you. But that's my interest and my area of expertise is about not just about science education, but about how we learn more generally. So Heather, do you want to just take a minute and introduce yourself, or does that
Sure.
work for
Yeah,
you?
I'd be glad to.
Okay.
So my name is Heather Bilden, and I consider myself a bit of a freelance educator because I have a few education jobs. One is part-time teaching at MSU Billings, and I also help run this course with Chris. This will be my second semester helping Chris out. And then I also work in our local rural public school. So I get to work with all ages and various subject matters, which keeps it pretty interesting. I do have an undergrad degree in biology, and then I got a Master of Education along with a 512 Science, Broadfield Science Teaching Certificate. So that's a little bit about my certifications. I used to work at the Audubon Center in Billings and worked there for, I guess it was 6 years as the education director, and as such worked with a lot of teachers who were trying to incorporate hands-on science into their classrooms through field trips and in-class visits. So I know a few people, or at least names from the Billings area, I guess just from running teacher workshops at the Audubon Center, and I look forward to getting to meet the rest of you.
Excellent, thank you. So it's always kind of interesting as we get started in the course. You all introduced yourselves, and definitely everybody here I think did that the first week. And then we gain and lose people as we go. There are some people who are signed up who didn't do the first week but will end up deciding to take the course, and some people who have started the course and will end up choosing not to take it. So today we have 3 people here on the line, and a couple of people emailed me with what was going on that they couldn't make it today. And that's why we say, you know, we don't expect everybody to make it every week. That would be a lot. But we are hopeful that these kind of live sessions give you an opportunity to ask your questions in real time and to hear other people's questions, because when somebody emails us directly, you don't all necessarily hear the answer, but also to have a little bit of a back and forth with each other as we work through some things that either are old concepts but new ways of looking at them, or are things that you just never really felt comfortable with or hadn't heard about in the past. So we hope that as everybody attends these this semester that we're able to make them useful. So what you should see on the screen, and if those of you who are not muted can just confirm that you see the course on the screen in front of you. Can you all see the course?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I have the course up, and I just want to point out a couple things. One is, if you see on week 2 how there's a gray band on the side of the module for that week, it's on both sides. If you ever feel like you've gotten lost in terms of where we're supposed to be, the course is programmed so that that gray band is always on the current week. And in the background, we've put in where the start and end dates are for things. So whenever you log in, you can just know that where you see that, that's where we are. That's just one thing that people have told me they didn't figure out right away, and it's helpful to know. The other is that these things, all of these things up here are kind of long-term things for the course that don't apply just to 1 week, but would be useful to multiple weeks. And so we put these up in the top in the course overview, and that way you can access them at any time. As we get further through the course, you will end up having to scroll down. And so we've done our best to keep it that it just says the week, the date, the title, and then it just has the link to get into the materials. And we've tried to leave as much as possible off of this front page to kind of reduce the amount of scrolling that you have to do as you get to the later parts of the course. So those are just some basic tips. I do encourage everyone to take some time to look at and think about the rubrics, especially the reflection rubric. Where it's pretty hard. The reflection rubric is designed to be about critical thinking and whether you're integrating whatever it is in the course for that week into your own experience, and not designed to be kind of a checklist that we're looking for a specific thing any 1 week. And so I just would encourage you to kind of think about the ideas that we've listed here. We haven't had very many people take the course in the 3 semesters it's been offered that didn't most of the time end up with at least 8 and mostly 10 on their reflection responses, but it has happened. And usually when it happens, it's because people haven't really taken the time to think about what the rubric said, and they were more regurgitating what the reading said instead of integrating that into their own experiences. So that's just something that's helpful to point out, I think. And there are videos online that I'm working on updating about the resource sharing and final project, and we'll talk more about those as we get closer. Right now, in weeks 1, 2, and 3, we're really doing some kind of groundwork laying in terms of what reading and writing is and why we read and write in science, and then what the Common Core is. And we'll talk more about those big assignments as we get past these first couple of weeks. So does anybody have any questions about navigating the course online based on your experience in the last week? Okay, well, if you come up with one, feel free to ask. Otherwise, I have this little PowerPoint. So the purpose of these is to give you an opportunity to talk about what you're reading like you would if we had a face-to-face class meeting, which we can't because we're spread out across our 1,000-mile wide state. So this week's questions, and you all did a great job last week with the idea of that we don't really, we're not trying to give a short answer to every question. We're trying to think critically about the things that really speak to us. So this week there are 6 kind of guiding questions that we've put in, and those are up on the screen right now, but they're kind of what's the purpose of reading in science? And I'm going to kind of articulate that as the purpose of using the text of others. And then what's the purpose of writing in science? Why do we generate our own text? And then more specifically as a teacher, like what concerns do you have about supporting students? I know as a high school teacher, I had some really specific concerns about how to support my juniors in high school as they wrote. And then what concerns do you have about evaluating student writing? And then what about this idea of digital text and digital tools that your students use? How does that kind of impact things? How does that allow communication in ways that print resources don't? And then what do you see as most important for learning with digital texts? So those are the questions this week, and our purpose here today is going to be, whether you've done all the readings, watched any of the videos, any of that, is it going to be to kind of talk about those ideas and share our own experiences and our own thinking about those issues. And the way that we've set these up is that we kind of go through them one question at a time, and they aren't necessarily exactly sometimes I have questions sprinkled in here that aren't exactly the same as the reflection questions. Today I think that we just have the reflection questions. But we'll go through them one question at a time and kind of have the opportunity to talk as a group about them. So this first question, what is the purpose in science of using the text of others? Why do we do that as scientists or in science class, either one?
To find out information.
To find out information, yes. And what grade do you teach?
I'm teach third grade.
Exactly. So third grade is that year where we have that transition, right? Where we kind of go from learning to read to reading to learn.
Right.
And so using the text of others to find out information is a really big deal in third grade.
Yes.
What are some other reasons that we use the text of others?
Research.
To research? Is that what I heard?
Yep.
Yeah, so to kind of go deeper and learn more, to get that broader approach that we get during research. Why else do we use the text of others? What about as a scientist, not even in the classroom? Why would scientists use the text of others in their work?
To build on someone else's experiment so they don't have to like reinvent the wheel.
Yes, so that's a really good one. So there's a little bit of a difference there between just getting information, which is a very important thing in science, and knowing what somebody else did so I can build off of it, which is a pretty functional thing, right? Beyond just knowing that they did something, but actually to build off of somebody else's work. And in science, that's huge. In a way that it isn't in every subject such a big deal that we're trying to avoid reinventing or avoid doubling up on. I heard somebody else was going to say something and stopped.
Oh, I think I was going to say to compare what they're working on, if they're working on a similar project, just to see if they're coming up with the same data as what the other person did.
Excellent. That's a great one. So to collaborate, maybe we could say, to work together or to co-research. That's one of the things as a high school science teacher that was hardest for me, because I wanted my students to have that experience the way a scientist would, but at the same time, I didn't want them to cheat. And in the artificial world we call school, what that line was between acting like another scientist might and checking our data against each other, it's a careful place that we need to be at between doing that and using somebody else's data, which of course a scientist should never do. But
Another thing might be to support building vocabulary, scientific vocabulary.
yes, so to learn the words of science and the talk of science. I think you're absolutely right. And if we think about the purpose of reading in college and in graduate school for people who are going to become scientists, so much of that is about just learning the language of science, learning how to talk. Which again, that's interesting. Actually, I had a meeting this morning with Fish, Wildlife, and Parks about some of their curriculum and what they do with students, and we were talking about how the Common Core is part of their work. And they said, well, we have a really hard time aligning to the Common Core because we don't ask students to read and write a lot on field trips. But we do ask them when they're on those field trips to talk and think and express and communicate like a scientist. And so in a lot of ways, that's the purpose of taking this time at the beginning, is to really get everybody to be remembering about all the different functions that text has beyond just getting an answer, which is what we probably, across all of K-12, that's probably the most common reason in a science classroom that students nationwide read, is just to find an answer. And we really want to make sure we're thinking far beyond just looking for an answer. If people have other things they want to kind of add to this or share or bring up, you can always come back and add more to this. But if we switch that and we think about not the opposite, but the corollary of that, what is the purpose in science, either in a classroom or in the work of a real scientist? What's the purpose of creating text? Why do we write in science?
To share our ideas.
To share our ideas. Yeah, I think science in general is kind of one of the most open-minded disciplines, in that we all have ideas and we need to share them and hear them and build off of them. It's not just about reiterating what's already been done. It's about having those new ideas, and text is a way to share those. Why else do we write in science?
As a third grade teacher, I would say it was for my students to practice writing.
Yes, that's really important. And we do have a pretty strong contingent of early, I call everything below grade 6 early grades. I know technically early grades has a different meaning than that, but I would say that kind of all of the things up through probably even 7th and 8th grade, when we're writing in science, actually one of the reasons we're doing it is to practice the art of writing. Um, and to have a realistic and authentic thing to write about instead of writing fake sentences. Um, and that's an important thing to acknowledge, that that sometimes it goes beyond science itself. It's about the writing.
One of the anchor standards that I was reading in one of the articles said that you're gathering relevant information from multiple sources and then trying to assess the credibility
Hmm.
of each source and integrate that information. So that's anchor standard writing number 8.
Yep. Um, that's a huge part. If I think about not even about science, but in a given day, when I pull out a pen and a piece of paper to write, the amount of time I'm doing that as a, my intent is actually to synthesize, right? I'm trying to pull, I've been listening to people, I've been reading things, and I'm trying to put all of my ideas into a way that makes sense. Um, and I actually, the tool that I use to do that is writing. And I think that's really important. I like one of my favorite things to do with teachers um, when I'm trying to help them think about these ideas of reading and writing is to have them do a science experiment that they're not familiar with, which, depending on the group, can be hard to find. Um, but to ask a group of teachers to do the experiment and then to come up together as an explanation, and after they've as a group decided on their explanation, to each individually have to write that down. Um, and it's amazing how strong of an experience that is to realize that you can talk to somebody and explain something. But when you stop to try to write it down, you have to process at a different level than just talking to another person. And that one of the points of writing is actually to synthesize so that we know that we understand.
I think writing can also increase engagement so that no one can just sit back and let somebody else do it.
Yes, yes. One of the reasons that we write in science is to show that we understand and that we are participating in the work because it's an active process. And especially in school science, writing is one of the only ways that we have of collecting information from students about what they know. And that's a big challenge in elementary school science, especially in K2. That this question of how is it then when a student is struggling with writing, how do I even find out what they know? How do I even hold them accountable? And so recognizing that that role of writing is about personal accountability and personal knowledge. So those are our two big, broad, overall questions, but hopefully that discussion kind of got all of us thinking a little bit outside of the box of just we write lab reports, because that is a huge portion of the writing that is done in classrooms, and thinking about the bigger idea of how reading is about gathering information beyond looking for answers, and about how writing is about synthesizing and communicating and collaborating beyond generating answers. Um, but is there? I'm going to move on, but it sounded like somebody might be saying something. Okay, well, but we're going to go back to school. So as you think about this idea of having students write, when we move into the second portion of the class and we talk a lot about educational theory and what we do in classrooms and why we do that, we're going to talk about having students write. And so I kind of want to take a step back and have an open conversation about what our concerns are about supporting students as they're writing. What makes that what makes that a challenge?
Are you talking about science writing or any writing?
It can, well, whatever is relevant to you. So for those of you that are secondary, definitely specifically science writing, but for those that are elementary, it's hard to separate the two. So whatever works for you.
My concerns would be to have time to discuss and like revise with students, and then their limited vocabulary.
Okay, so time to discuss and revise, and then their vocabulary is limited, which is a challenge. And one of the things I am 99% sure that we read this week is a piece called Getting Past Just Because. And what I love about it is that they go through and they talk about so many different scaffolds that they use in their classroom. And what I don't love about it is that I have a hard time imagining that I could make time to use all of the scaffolds that they talk about in the article. But it reassured me as I read it to think about making more concrete. What is it that I would be making time for? Is it having one-on-one conferences with students? Is it having class discussions about the assignment? What are the things that we really want to make time for? And I think defining that sometimes is really helpful.
I think one of my concerns is, as a secondary teacher, is am I doing enough to prepare them for college?
And
how do I know? Yeah, the other part of that is how do I know I'm doing enough?
Yeah, that's a really huge one. And I think that we know kind of across the board, not any one teacher, but we know across the board that we're not doing enough to prepare students for college level writing, because it is one of our large problems of remediation is that students arrive in college and then have to take non-credit bearing courses before they can take a college level writing course. And so we know that that's an area of struggle. And so where do we really get that help? And I think that really having rubrics that can meet your comfort level. I know my concern about supporting students as they write was always that I wasn't ever trained to be a writing teacher. I wasn't trained as an English teacher, and so I could go and I'd look at all these rubrics and they were way more. They were too much far beyond what I was comfortable doing, and that finding something that meets a place that you're comfortable, I think that there's a lot of evidence to show that teachers taking the time to write and then supporting students at the level that they can does more to prepare the kids than trying to go beyond where we're comfortable. And we'll look at some rubrics that are pretty simple and that really ask more about the progression of ideas and the types of arguments that kids give. And in terms of a secondary science classroom, if we can support that part of things, just are they making a good argument? Hopefully, then we can count on our ELA counterparts to go beyond that. Now, if there are people out there that feel really strongly that they are prepared to tackle the full 6 traits as a secondary science teacher, there are some people who do that, and that's fantastic. But I think that the evidence is really strongly showing that that our job as science teachers needs to be supporting argumentation and supporting that evidence-based explanation. And we'll look at rubrics for that. I don't know if that helped you at all, Renee.
Yeah, I mean, I am trying to do some of that as is, and having elementary background, I have gone through all the training with the writing and the reading and that type of thing. But at the same time, there's always that question in the back of your mind of, did I do this right? Did I do enough? Because you're looking at the kids going off to college and you just don't know.
Yep. Yeah.
Well, and I guess this is Heather. As a part-time college instructor, I can speak a little bit to that. I'm pretty amazed. I guess I've gotten used to it now, but I was pretty amazed at the wide range of writing skills that students come to college with. I mean, there's a huge gap between the best writers and those that are really struggling. And so I think for some students it's really working well, and they're coming in and they're able to put together their ideas into coherent papers, but clearly for other students there are missing links. So I don't know where that needs to be addressed. I mean, what level are they missing that? I try to work with them at the college level a little bit, but at the same time we're really trying to help them with content, and I don't want to go through and just be like the grammar police on their whole paper and not get what their ideas are. So it kind of has to be a balance between the content and the grammar and how they're forming their paper. And it is a struggle. It's something that's really actually surprised me in reading the papers. And so what I've done is I use a rubric the same way Chris suggested. And one component of the rubric is kind of paper structure, those grammar, do you follow the rule of punctuation, you know, have the verb for every sentence, all of that basic stuff. And then a couple of the other parts of the rubric are more on content and, you know, did you propose your idea and defend it, etc. So I guess it's still not perfect.
Yeah, I
Heather,
think, oh, yes.
Heather, oh, I'm sorry, I had a question. Heather, I was wondering, you know, looking at the Common Core writing standards, do you think those will be helpful or those are sufficient enough to move them to college?
Yes, I guess the thing about the Common Core that gives me a little hope is it seems like it's really emphasizing writing in every subject. So instead of just, okay, that's what you do in English class, it's let's work on your writing in various subjects little by little. And I think that alone, that sort of repetition or perhaps overlap between subjects should provide a stronger base for writing skills to develop.
And actually, I want to just chime in on that. And I switched the slide to the second question, and initially when we were writing the reflection questions for this week, it was just one question. And I split it apart into these two questions one about supporting students and the other about evaluating student writing. And I think that the question, the Common Core and Heather's answer, and I think it's really important that one of the things the Common Core does is it separates the conventions of English apart from the writing standards. Because in many ways, the conventions of English and grammar is something that has to be taught separately from the question of how do I build an argument, how do I express my idea, how do I have coherent linear progression to my thoughts. And if you don't have the conventions of English, if you're not using correct punctuation, it makes it really hard to understand that progression of thought. But it is really nice the way that the Common Core has separated that out so that especially as we think about, you know, if we have a teacher in our building, either because we are that teacher and we're teaching our students both parts of it, or because we're going to collaborate with an ELA teacher, when we think about that evaluation, that we really are evaluating separate standards. When we ask the question about, did you express your ideas to me versus did you use the standards and conventions of English appropriately? And as a science teacher, I never felt comfortable evaluating the standard conventions of English. I probably should have. It just was one of the areas that always scared me about being wrong. I didn't want to tell them that they were wrong and then be wrong about it. But the Common Core does separate that out nicely and define both parts of it. And our job as during science instruction is really to make sure we get that vocabulary of science, and then to collaborate with the ELA teacher, whether that's us because we're elementary and we teach everything, or whether that's another person, to really work on those conventions, which is part of what you know, Heather is mentioning, that kids are coming to college with a pretty wide variety of grammar knowledge and conventions of English knowledge, in addition to a really wide variety of ability to build an argument. And I've seen that as I've worked with undergrads as well, that some of them come in and can write you a 5-paragraph essay pretty well. Others come in and have no idea what it means to have one organizing argument or thesis statement and then sentences supporting that, even that part is not quite there. So the more that we work on that part, I think the better. Does anybody use a 6 trait? Does anybody that on the call today work in a school that's adopted a 6 trait rubric that you use across disciplines?
Well, in Hardin, we used it when I first came, and then they dropped it, and it was a district-wide thing. So I think the one article on Just Because was talking about putting that back into the curriculum where they were. I don't know, Gail might be able to answer about the reading program and what the writing piece is on that.
We use a different rubrics from different trainers that we've had.
Mm-hmm.
So we're still using rubrics to evaluate, but not the 6 traits.
You guys, in Hardin, you guys are Striving Readers School?
Yes.
Yeah. So I know that in Montana, it's pretty regional. There's 2 entire regions that use 6 traits, and then there's a lot of Striving Reader schools, and Striving Readers uses something different, not drastically different than 6 traits, but different than 6 traits. And a lot of our secondary science teachers have never been exposed to any rubric that includes kind of all of those pieces. And so that's why in the readings and in the rubric examples, we've really tried to show a range of them from, you know, ways that you can support the full-blown 6 trait rubric or something similar, or the very scaled down rubric where you really would be saying, actually, I'm really just evaluating whether you're communicating your ideas about science and using evidence appropriately. The full range of that is acceptable and effective. As far as the field is concerned, it's up to your district and your school and yourself, ultimately, which of those levels you choose to do. I personally think it does more harm than good to have somebody who is uncomfortable or not knowledgeable about trying to tell kids how to have good grammar and how to do some of those more structural parts of writing, that if our expertise is science, we should focus on that, and if we have a wider expertise, that's great. But trying to put that square peg in the round hole, I've seen it do a lot more harm than good. And so I like to encourage teachers to find their comfort level and work from there, and that's better for kids than trying to push ourselves beyond our expertise if we truly are secondary science teachers, and we're not comfortable. So excellent. I think those questions are the last ones that are about that section. We also have a little bit in this week about digital text and digital literacy, so the other questions are about that. This question is really, really, really long. But basically, the question is, how do digital text and digital tools allow students to have new understandings and new communications that maybe when we were in school weren't options? What are the positives of that you see as a teacher, of having students communicate in those ways?
I think it really helps, especially with video sources that are available now through YouTube, TeacherTube, so many other things, that students who are struggling with a concept, you can find a video and share that with them, and somehow that just helps the whole thing click in their minds.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. You know, we don't always I mean, sometimes just the way somebody's communicating something to us is what's making it not make sense. And using digital tools to provide alternate explanations or alternate visualizations of something can be a huge asset for students, that they are able then to get more support in understanding beyond just what we know how to communicate. We have the whole World Wide Web to help us.
I was really excited when I started reading the optional article on the new literacies of online research. And when they, what impressed me was when they did it, it was called Are Energy Drinks Heart Healthy? And they were actually, you know, communicating with a student on an email and then asking a question, and then the student had to go and do research and there's all the skills of online skills that we need to teach. And so I thought that was really great.
Yeah, and actually the videos for this section is one of the ones that I've been dragging my feet about re-recording because Sarah, who helped write the course, and she's the one that you hear in some of the videos right now, Sarah's dissertation was on digital literacy. Our research was done in in a middle school, and she developed this whole digital component to their inquiry project where they actually had to go online and use all these sites, and that's what she wrote her dissertation on, was how students used the digital tools. And so she was the one who brought in kind of those extra articles for people who wanted to know more. And I think it's amazing and fascinating the things that kids can do in terms of reaching out to the entire world to get information through digital tools. It's just amazing what's out there for kids.
And they're better at it than we are, but
Yes,
we can learn from them.
they're much better at it than we are. My sons are better at it than I am, and they're quite young. So,
Yeah.
what about, I mean, thinking beyond, so research and having the ability to research and to pull in all that information is one, but what about the other types of digital tools that are out there? What about things like simulations or, I read all the time about amazing things that kids are doing with Minecraft to communicate their understanding of things. Often those are communicating understandings of history, but what about all those other tools that we have, all those other ways that kids can show us that they understand that are not writing a 5-paragraph essay? How does digital text and digital tools open up new avenues for kids in that way?
I was just thinking about that actually because I use the PHET Colorado website quite a bit with physics and chemistry. And I mean, sometimes there's just not enough money to go around to buy the different tools to help them with understanding the concepts. And so being able to go to these websites that actually have simulations that they can change the variables and see the results and record the information, it's very helpful. And so that's a really excellent way of making sure that students can do a lab even though they're not in 3D doing the lab.
Yeah, I always tell people that the reasons for simulations are always about the twos, right? It's too expensive, too big, too small, too long, too short. The only two that simulations don't help is that it was too cheap, right? If it didn't cost enough, that the simulation, you didn't need it. But other than that, simulations help us with all of those extremes, and they help us to give kids experiences so that they don't just have to go read a paragraph. And the paragraph says, well, Newton's second law says F equals ma, memorize that. They can actually go online and play with the variables and prove it to themselves, even though we couldn't afford, an air track in our school to help them prove it to themselves in person. It's a huge benefit. Yeah, and a lot of people, when they talk about simulations, they reference the ones that are designed for secondary use, but there are so many simulations out there for young children as well. And I can't remember if it's actually built into the course material or if I've uploaded it separately, but I have a handout that lists kind of a whole bunch of different places you can go to see if they have a simulation that meets your needs, subject matter that you're going to talk about, that I can upload if it's not already up there. What about using tools to express their understanding, not just taking in the information, but actually for them to communicate to you? Does anybody use creative kind of outputs like letting kids make videos or code their own programming, do their own stuff to have an output that's not a written text for them to demonstrate their understanding?
I've used like ToonDo or I forget what the other one is, but cartoon making programs that are online and have the kids do different things like the virus cycle or different kinds of energy transfers in biology, that type of thing, so that they can create their own interesting, dynamic drawing, essentially, but then they understand what they're putting on paper, too, and then I can see how well they understood it as well.
Yeah, I think that that's really important to, as we think about the idea of digital text and digital tools, is really to acknowledge that um, that that it does help us to provide accommodations to students sometimes, but also even students that don't require accommodations, sometimes it just sparks their interest and they're more interested in getting to the point of really understanding because they want to play with the digital tool. Um, and, you know, however they get there, if they get to a point where they really understand the science and can communicate that understanding, that's a definite win. And, you know, while it may be true that you know, college readiness still does involve being able to produce traditional text to show your understanding. When we think about career readiness and we think about how college is changing, providing our students the opportunities to use tools like that is really in their best interest because it is more and more common that people need to be able to use them in their jobs going forward. The other thing that I want to just kind of point out, I can't, to make sure that we talk a little bit about it, is that one of the things that I hear from teachers a lot about formative assessment and science journals is that it can be kind of a burden. The physical act of collecting journals from 160 students to look at them. It just, where do you keep those? How do you transport them? Some of these really practical concerns about having students do writing frequently in the classroom, but some of the digital tools like blogging tools or different ways of kind of maintaining an online response journal of sorts, even if you don't grade it every day, it allows the student to write wherever they are and you to evaluate wherever you are and remove some of those physical barriers that we have to having students write every day. So that's just another one that I wanted to mention. And the last question for the reflection questions this week is, as you think about this idea of the digital world, there's some definite skills that kids need. And we talked a little bit about that. There's a little bit about that in the video, the idea of online safety, helping kids to understand how to be safe, have those skills, but also how to evaluate what text is valid, and knowing how to use the computer without worrying about keyboarding itself. So what are the things that we can do as science teachers to make sure that kids are ready to use digital tools and digital text as they are relevant?
Well, you have to model for them where to go.
Yes. That was Michelle, I think, talking. Yes. That's absolutely true. And I think that in the week about modeling, that's actually one of the videos that we have, is a video that shows modeling using a digital text and what it looks like as a teacher to model that for your students. And so that's a huge one, is modeling it. Another huge one is just giving them the opportunity. I know, and I don't know how many of you are involved in helping to administer the new testing, but that's one of the concerns that our office deals with a lot, is teachers who are concerned about whether or not kids are just ready to use the computer in that way. And, you know, over and over what we see is that all it takes is just exposing kids to it. Every time you use a simulation, every time you ask them to go look something up online, you're giving them the experience that they need to be able to be successful on those computer-based test environments.
That's one of my big questions is, third graders, it takes them forever just to type a sentence in, let alone a full paragraph or paper about what they're supposed to be writing about for the test.
Yes. I have no answer to that except yes. I have a
Oh.
third grader, and I am very concerned about what this year will look like for him. But the good news is that all third graders are pretty equal in that way. And hopefully, if the test is going to ask too much of them, they'll be able to modify that after they see it, and it will hit everybody the same way. So at least I think it's an even playing field. Even our most digitally native young children are going to struggle, I think, with writing a big paragraph on the computer. So I'm
As a
hopeful
test,
that it goes
yeah,
well.
I'm the test coordinator too, and I'm thinking that they're going to find out a lot. Like you said, maybe third graders aren't ready to do a
Right.
test, and maybe some kids can do it online, but some can't.
Right. And maybe what we're going to find out is just kind of what percentage of our students are there, and you know, the test doesn't penalize the child. It's not like children are being held back. In some states, you do have to pass the test to move to the next grade, and in our state at least, the SBAC is not, or the Smarter Balance test is not used in that way, and especially not this year as we kind of get our baseline. And so maybe we will learn that we need to spend a lot more time doing simulations. Maybe we will learn that we need to do more time doing that. But I think I'm hopeful that we'll have some time to think about those questions when we get the scores. And hopefully this year it is not, hopefully it goes well. Last year with the field test, what we heard from most schools was that it went pretty well.
It went pretty good. My school, we had implemented the MAPS testing. And so we had implemented the MAP testing, so my students had already had 2 experiences with the measure of academic progress testing
Right.
before we did the Smarter Balance. And I even have one of my kindergartners was ready this year to take the MAPS testing, so I had her do it. And it depends on the child.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, and I think we'll see, but, and, you know, and I mean, kind of, I brought up testing, so, you know, I think I don't want to put too much influence or importance on that. That wasn't my intent in bringing it up, but I think that it is important that we do think about whether it's the Smarter Balanced or the MAPS or whatever it is, that as we become a more and more digital society, our students are, at whatever grade level it starts, they're going to be expected to be able to demonstrate their knowledge using digital tools. And so the more experience we can give them with those, the more just exposure we can give them, the more we can model how to do that correctly, the better off our students will be. And that's kind of separate from any content. We live in a pretty digital world. So I don't want to keep you late, and it's only 2 minutes to 6. So if people have other questions for me, I'm glad to stay on for a little bit after 6. But, you know, today's conversation, this is probably one of the more straightforward conversations. As we get further into the course, we'll have more time where we have fewer questions and we're kind of digging deeper into what these things mean. But this is kind of the intent of having this discussion each week, is to be able to get outside of our own heads and to not just read something and write something, but to actually talk about it. So hopefully you all had a positive experience, and we'll post this video or the recording of this for everyone who wasn't able to be here. And all of you who were here, hopefully it's really easy to sit down and write that reflection because you just did it with your comments. But then as next week we'll talk in this forum about actually the Common Core standards and what they mean for science, because that's what next week's topic is. So I really appreciate you all being here today. And